Good afternoon, Malacanang Press Corps, Department of Foreign Affairs Press Corps, and ASEAN Philippine Media Delegation. The ASEAN Summit is the highest policy-making body in ASEAN, comprising the heads of state, of government, or ASEAN member states. It is held twice a year and serves as a venue for discussion and policy deliberations on various developments and global issues affecting the Southeast Asian region and beyond. The 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits and related summits will be held in Phnom Penh, Cambodia next week. The East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, and the ASEAN Leaders Meeting with the UN Secretary General will be held concurrently. These related summits will review the existing and new areas of cooperation and exchange views on regional and international issues between ASEAN and its dialogue partners. The dialogue partners include Australia, Canada, China, India, Republic of Korea, and the USA. During the trip, the President will also meet with the Filipino community in Cambodia. He will update them on the programs and policies of his administration, especially on the protection and promotion of the rights and welfare of OFWs. To give us more details on the participation of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to the ASEAN Summit next week, we have this afternoon the following officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs. DFA spokesperson Ambassador Teresita Daza, Office of the ASEAN Affairs Assistant Secretary Daniel Espiritu, and Office of the Asian and Pacific Affairs Assistant Secretary Nathaniel Imperial. So, ma'am, ladies first. If you have any statement, please go ahead. Thank you.
Just to thank the OPS for organizing this. It is a joint press conference. We also have the DFA Press Corps joining us online so that they can answer questions relative to this meeting. This is one of the important meetings that will be held this year, and we're very happy to have ASEC Daniel Espiritu, who's heading ASEAN, and also ASEC Neil Imperial, who heads ASPAC, to actually answer your questions, both on what's happening with ASEAN, but also as well as in terms of bilateral meetings that will be convened during this event. Thank you.
We will now entertain questions.
Questions from MPC? We have question from Jonah Giolagon of Asahi Shimbun. Please expound on the recommendations that foreign ministers will present to leaders in connection with Myanmar.
ASEC Dan.
Okay. Last October 27, we had a special foreign ministers meeting in Jakarta to discuss the issue of Myanmar. Okay, during that meeting, the different foreign ministers put forth a list of recommendations to push forward the implementation of the 5-point consensus. But this will still have to be processed, so I think I'd better not preempt the nature of the list at this point, because it will still be processed by some leaders of ASEAN on the way to the summit. And whatever will be processed there will be cleared by the foreign ministers before it could be elevated to the summit leaders during the summit. Yeah, thank you.
ASEC, follow-up from Zona. Will ASEAN leaders initiate any new action to encourage Myanmar's military to resume or fast-track the implementation of ASEAN's 5-point consensus?
Yeah, definitely they will. And that's why there are these 11 recommendations that are going to be discussed. But at this point, there's still no consensus on the 11th. And so this will have to be processed, as I said a moment ago. Yeah.
Next question from Neil Jerome Morales of Reuters. We are hearing from EU sources that ASEAN countries will have shown for the first time an interest in discussing a possible trade deal with the EU ahead of the EU-ASEAN summit in December in Brussels. At the ASEAN summit next week, Are there plans to launch exploratory talks with the EU for an EU-ASEAN FTA, or are there plans to launch such exploratory talks be discussed?
Okay, the ASEAN EU FTA has started the talk on that. The negotiations have started almost 10 years ago, but somewhere along the way it's stalled, and up to this point there's still no progress in that. And so far, there's no plan yet, or there's no concrete discussion yet on the resumption of such talks. Now, the coming ASEAN summit will be just an ASEAN summit. We'll have a separate commemorative summit in Brussels for ASEAN EU in December, and I think that could be a good venue for a discussion on that. Although there's nothing yet on the table, as far as we are concerned today. Thank you.
Can I just add to?
Go ahead,
just,
ma'am.
For backgrounder, as rightfully mentioned by ASEC, the talks on the ASEAN EU FTA has been ongoing. In 2007, negotiations for that was launched. In 2009, it was suspended. Then again in 2017, it was agreed to relaunch the discussion on this, and a joint working group was established. But since then, there were other developments that were happening also at the bilateral level. ASEAN, individual ASEAN countries started also negotiating with the EU in terms of a bilateral FTA with them. So Singapore, for example, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia commenced negotiations on the FTAs. But the one that prospered was that of Singapore and Vietnam. And this track is also ongoing, besides the discussion on supposedly the ASEAN EU FTA. We were informed that there were actually discussions that were raised this year for a resumption of this, and the ASEAN actually also did a counter proposal, but it's still at the stage where there's ongoing discussions on it. But whether it will be launched and it will be undertaken is something that will still be seen, because from the ASEAN's perspective, we're waiting actually. The ASEAN is waiting for the proposal, the response of the EU in terms of their proposals presented to them already in August 2022.
Thank you, ma'am. Vance Fernandez, Police Files.
Good afternoon to all the men and ladies. For ASEC Daniel Spiritu, aside from the ASEAN, ano pa ba ang other trips na schedule ng ating Pangulo and their importance?
Of course, after ASEAN, he will attend the APEC summit also in Bangkok. And then in December, as I said a moment ago, the ASEAN EU summit in Brussels. Yeah.
What's the importance behind it?
I cannot speak really for APEC, but it's more on the trade and investment facilitation in the Asia Pacific. It's composed of 21 countries. So the agenda there, especially on post-pandemic recovery, would be very crucial for the economic agenda of the region, especially in terms of resolving the outstanding issues that were spawned in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, especially food and energy security issues, the disruption of the supply chain, the supply chain in the world, and other measures that would be agreed upon by the 21 economic leaders of APEC to pave the way forward for more sustainable recovery in the years ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Just add to the APEC.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You asked for significance, but I'd also want to add to what ASEC Dan has mentioned. November will be quite hectic. You're correct in that. It will be a hectic period for DFA and the government because of the number of meetings that are going to be attended and participated in. And aside from the ASEAN, which will be held soon, immediately after will be APEC, and in the same month of November, where the President, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, and the Secretary of Trade and Industry will participate in a Leaders' Week in Bangkok. This will be the first meeting of the President and his administration. And it will be significant because we are a founding member of APEC. As you all know, APEC was established in 1989. It has 21 member economies, and it covers the areas of trade and investment, energy cooperation, conservation of marine resources, telecommunication, and human resource development. It is significant to the Philippines largely because for the Philippines, APEC economies account for 85% of total trade of the Philippines. Over 7.5 million out of 10.7 million, or 70% of Filipinos abroad, call APEC region home. They are also responsible for 68% of the remittances making its way to the Philippine economy. And in terms of visitors to the Philippines from APEC, it comprises about 56% of tourist arrivals. Like all meetings, it's an important platform for us to actually share our experiences across different areas, the initiatives that were taken, especially in terms of the post-COVID recovery, our desire to actually see how more we can have more supply chain resiliencies. So there are a number of areas that are priority to the Philippines that we'll actually discuss.